The American embassy in Nigeria says the change in government in the United States will not in any way affect its international exchange program with Nigeria or elsewhere. The Counselor for Public Affairs in the United States Embassy in Abuja, Aruna Amithanayagam, gave the assurance while kickstarting an ICT software development program for secondary school students in Osogbo, the Osun State capital. He says the program has developed the human resources capacity of over 1 million people who've helped to solve problems of poverty, environmental degradation, disease outbreaks, amongst others.
The knowledge that you gain in the United States is something that can be shared, in Nigeria for the betterment of all of your communities. I know that the alumni for us are a vital link between the American and Nigerian peoples. And I can assure you that all of these exchange programs are going to continue into the future. We have a new administration in Washington, and there's talks about budget cuts and so forth, but I'm very sure that these exchange programs will continue as they are such a vital part of our program to improve relations between our two great countries.
ICT is the way to go. It's the language of this generation, it's the language of this century. If we are serious about combating the scourge of poverty and giving equal opportunity to our youth, ICT is the way to go. We must give them equal opportunity by exposing them to the opportunity for them to tap into the innate ability that they have. And you will agree with me that if you want to achieve what we call sustainable development, they must pay attention to IT.
The International Committee of the Red Cross says rains in Somalia have brought relief from drought, but malnutrition remains a threat. The group says the number of children admitted to its feeding centers nationwide have nearly doubled from last year's figures. More than 2 million people are facing starvation in the north of African nation, suffering the effects of repeated rain failures and decades of conflict.
In Baidoa town, this nutritional center is one of the few facilities where malnourished children below 5 years of age can access treatment in south and central Somalia. Baidoa Hospital, which hosts the nutritional clinic, has recorded an increase in patients, which has stretched the hospital's capacity far beyond its 150-bed limit. Tents have been put up to accommodate more patients. The center has now admitted 230 children compared to the 100 children admitted at the same time last year. Dominic Steelhat, the ICRC Director of Operations Worldwide, was recently in the country, visiting facilities supported by the organization.
What we saw in the two nutrition centers that we are supporting in Kismayo and in Baidoa is nearly double the number of children that have been admitted to these two centers, which is clearly the result of the severe food crisis that is currently affecting Somalia.
Across the country, the number of malnourished children at its stabilization centers and those run by the Somali Red Crescent Society has shot up by 80% to 12,710. Uncertainty about sufficient rainfall during the current season, April to May, has raised fears that the effect of the drought will persist, and the risk of the situation deteriorating further remains very real. The rains began in parts of the country in the second week of April and have since spread to most areas. 6 years ago, a devastating famine in the country led to the death of over 250,000 people, half of them children. Half of the country's 12 million citizens are expected to need aid by July, according to the agencies.
We are aiming together at reaching up to 7 million people until the end of this year, and we have appealed for roughly 600 million Swiss francs from our donors.
Food shortages are worsened by fighting in some areas occupied by Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militants. But unlike in 2011, when Al-Shabaab's restriction on movement and its refusal to allow many aid groups access pushed up the death toll, the group is allowing people to move.
In the meantime, over 20,000 refugees have arrived in Angola from the Democratic Republic of Congo's Kasai region, where they've been fleeing insecurity and violence since early April. A steady stream of refugees continue to cross into Dundo in Lunda Noroti province in desperate conditions, many of them malnourished, sick and fearful for their lives amid reports of civilians being targeted.
Thousands of refugees fleeing fighting between the army and the armed groups in the Central Democratic Republic of Congo have sought refuge in overcrowded villages across the border in Angola. The UN's refugee agency UNHCR says some 20,563 refugees have fled Kasai Central Province amid clashes between local militias and Congolese forces that started last August, with 3,000 arriving in recent days.
People is arriving in desperate conditions. They are without water since days because they fled through the bush to cross the border. Without food, they arrive really sick. We're receiving in the last days a lot of wounded and injured people that are transported by helicopters as priority by the army and are immediately transferred at the hospital where registration happens.
UNHCR officials say refugees reported fleeing attacks from militia groups who are targeting police, military officials and civilians who they believe are supporting or representing the government. Some of the refugees have had to hide in the forest for days in their bid to reach safety in Angola, Congo's southern neighbor. The latest violence in the Central African country, a tinderbox of conflicts over land, ethnicity and minerals, has worsened since security forces killed the leader of the Kamwina Nsapu militia. Fighting in Kasai is the most serious threat to President Joseph Kabila, whose decision to stay in power, even though his mandate ran out in December, has stoked rebellion and lawlessness in different parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 400 people have been killed in the conflict and more than 1 million displaced, with the United Nations identifying 40 mass graves. Local media reported in April that Angolan authorities say they are reinforcing security patrols along the border with Congo in order to keep the militias from infiltrating their territory.
Finally, on the program, Nigerian Afrobeat musician Femi Kuti has been reacting to his record-breaking feat of holding a single note on a saxophone for more than 51 minutes. Femi, the son of Afrobeat music icon and activist Fela Kuti, is a music legend in his own right. And this record, he says, should inspire others to test limits and never give up.
Disappointed that the Guinness Book does not recognize the award. It was never my objective. If it was my objective, I would have called them to be there. I didn't want them to be there. It was to show the possibility to give, especially young African boys and girls, that even at my age, we're not limited to achieving greatness. That we can get out of any mess we want to if we set our minds. We can stop corruption. We can make Africa the envy of the world. We can build a road from Lagos to Johannesburg. And only young people, if they believe in this dream, young people can get us out of the mess we are in.
That's Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.